And good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Hoops HD Report. Coming to you, we're recording live on tape delay here a little after 9 p.m. on
Woohoo!
Monday, December 12th. I am your host, Chad Sherwood. Off to one side of me over here, John Stalika. The other side, David Griggs, making all those noises. Down below us, Matt Zakowski and John Teitel. And let me start. David, you're live in Seton Hall this evening.
Yes.
For what reason?
I was here for the Seton Hall, South Carolina game.
You know that that's being played in New York City.
What?
Yeah, at Madison Square Garden.
No. Did you check the write-up this morning? It said it was at Seton Hall.
I'm watching the game right now, and it's about to tip, and they're definitely in Madison Square Garden.
John!
David, we had this on our Under the Radar the other night. Will you at least be able to get us an interview with somebody from Seton Hall during the course of our podcast here?
Well, it might be complicated by the fact that the game isn't at Seton Hall. But sure, I'll see what I can do.
Well, there's got to be somebody like cleaning up the gym or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, right here behind me. Like, I'm sort of in, like, one of the press rooms. So, yeah, I'll try and go find somebody that we can...
Okay, so tune in. If you're a huge Seton Hall fan, you just want to fast forward to the end of the video now. You'll be able to hear David's interview with the locker room manager for Seton Hall.
Yeah.
But for the rest of you here that are actually coming to listen to something more insightful than that, we've got a lot to get to tonight. But before we turn to the games that have been played, a couple of pieces of news, and let me start John Stalika. Over one of the saddest pieces of news is, or most roughest piece of news, came out of Western Michigan this week, where a member of the basketball team was arrested and being potentially charged with murder here. This is real scary.
Yeah, it's not just murder, but I think there was also another charge that he was facing, and needless to say, the school has already distanced themselves from the former player and has already expressed, I guess, their condolences for the victim and his family. So a very sad situation for all parties involved.
And it's despicable. It was an armed robbery gone bad. I'd like for someone to explain to me when a robbery goes well. Like, when is that ever a win-win situation? And they ended up shooting somebody. That's despicable. I mean, if he's guilty, then I hope he goes to prison.
Yeah, it is. As a freshman, Jover Kennedy is an individual being accused of the crime at the moment. So obviously, if any of the news comes out of that, we'll keep you up to date. Turning our news to something also maybe just as bad here in Kansas, where we've had a significant suspension. John T. I'm sorry, his name just slipped my mind, so maybe you could help me out here.
Sure, Carlton Bragg.
Carlton Bragg. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Of a top 5 Kansas team, he pled not guilty to a Class B misdemeanor battery charge on Friday. He is alleged to have pushed his girlfriend down the stairs during an argument. If you go online to look for his booking photo, usually you see all these guys looking sad. He's actually smiling in his booking photo, which looks a little weird just because it's so out of the ordinary. Coach Bill Self has indefinitely suspended him. He's a big part of this team. He's scoring 8 points a game this year. He's not the lead option, but when you're a top 5 team, you need help from a bunch of players, and he could make the difference in March, which we're not even close to, but we'll see how it goes. Charge itself is punishable by a fine or up to 6 months in jail. I assume he's not doing 6 months in jail because it seems like a lot of sports figures, short of murdering someone during an armed robbery, get away with stuff these days. But it's a minor blow to the Kansas program that could turn into a major blow.
If we want to talk about programs getting blows this week also, Matt, Georgetown just got a blow today as Isaac Copeland announced that he's been missing a few games already with an injury, but he's decided to pack his bags and leave. He was in double figures for each of the 5 games he did play this season, and that's it. He's transferring. He's not going to play again for Georgetown.
Yeah, but after the freshman year, especially the second half of it, I am stunned that this happened. If I was leaving Georgetown after his junior year, I'd say to be a first-round pick of the NBA draft. Like, 6'9", can shoot it from anywhere, pretty athletic, and as strong as high school career going into Georgetown, I it's kind of a Georgetown program, but man, like that's not an ending I could have foreseen.
Yeah, and David, you and I disagreed about the Copeland transfer a little bit in emails earlier. You thought that it would be better for him to play out the rest of the year and transfer. I thought that if you're going to transfer, this is the time to do it so that you can play next year. Sure, it'll only be the second semester, but that's the more important semester.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's how you look at it, but I think it's better to play a full season start to finish, whereas had he stayed, he would have been able to do that. As it is, like he'll get a semester and a half, I believe, at his new school. But, I mean, why not finish out the season? If you want to transfer to play, like you can't play for a year.
But if you think you're going to be an NBA prospect, do you want to wait 2 more years for the NBA draft or just 1 more year?
Well, me, I just went straight to the NBA.
Okay.
The rules were different back then.
Well, what we want to do tonight is, for the rest of the show here, is we want to take a look at some of the games that happened. What I want to do is kind of go through by conference here, one at a time. We can discuss some of the games that happened this week as we go through each of these conferences. And want to start things off in the ACC, which
we've got 10 multi-bid leagues.
We've got 10 multi-bid leagues to go through. The ACC, maybe the best one, although there's no undefeated teams left in the ACC. John Titel, we do have 4 teams in the top 10 of the Ken Palms, but only 2 in the top 10 of the AP and the coaches poll, being, of course, Duke and Carolina. Is this just a Duke and Carolina league from what you've seen so far now, or are there really 4 or 5 teams here?
There are really 4 or 5 teams here. Notre Dame almost beat the best team in the nation. Florida State is a 3-point loss away from being undefeated. Virginia's going to suffer without Austin Nichols. North Carolina looked bad against Tennessee, but we have a lot of great teams in this conference.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that. A couple of those games you just mentioned. That North Carolina-Tennessee game, I got a chance to see a lot of that game. And what I really saw in that North Carolina-Tennessee game was a team that looked like it was playing without a point guard. And, oh, by the way, their starting point guard, Joel Berry, was not playing in the game. I'm not that concerned about it, though, David. I think that even though they barely escaped in that Tennessee game, I'm not concerned that because Berry will be back, and I think that was what was missing.
And I agree 100%. It was surprising to me. I just – it's not that I think I think as good as I think North Carolina is and as bad as I think Tennessee is, I was surprised that the game was that close, but – I was surprised. I was not alarmed. I still think North Carolina is a fantastic team, a 1-seed caliber team potentially, and they're going to be just fine.
And Matt, Florida State, very nice win over Florida, cracked the top 25 rankings this week as well.
Yeah, so that's actually the first chance I've gotten to see the Seminoles play, and that's a nice roster. Like, one thing I might argue is you don't have a true point guard. I mean, Rayton Mays has kind of transitioned to that role, but a bunch of other guards. Dwayne Bacon's really good. Like, probably should be in the NBA right now. Good. You got Jonathan Isaac coming back first game from his hip injury. The dual 7-footers and Ojo and Kumaja, 6'10" Jarquez just because you need a third 3-headed monster. And then, some nice freshman guards, C.J. Walker, Trent Forrest. Really good roster for Lil Hamilton. It seems like, unlike some of his past teams, they blend together pretty well.
And let me switch the view here, but Stalika, let me bring you in here on this game here between Villanova and Notre Dame that John T. mentioned as well. Is Notre Dame for real based on what you saw here and the way they competed with Villanova, even though they lost the game?
Well, it was a losing effort, but at the same time, they had Villanova on the ropes early on because I think they were ahead by as many as 13 or 15 points, but Josh Hart was not going to be denied in this one for Nova. Although on a side note, has John T. been getting shaving tips from Mike Bray because they both seem to have the same 5 o'clock shadow there.
Oh, okay.
I'm a little late to November. What can I say?
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, David, you had a comment about that?
Oh, no, I mean, I don't get shaving tips from Mike Bray, but I was really impressed with Notre Dame. Ironically, I was most impressed by the one game that they lost. To me, it was a statement that they can compete with the top-ranked teams in the country. This is like the second time in about 3 or 4 years that I've just completely written off Notre Dame and didn't think they would be much, and here they are, again, looking like a top 15 team.
John T., we haven't really maybe mentioned Duke, who did pick up a nice win back on Tuesday night of the Jimmy V Classic over Florida, a Florida team that had a pretty rough week with their 2 losses we've already mentioned to ACC schools. But Duke, number 4 in the coaches poll, 5 in the AP poll, number 1 according to Ken Palm right now. Anything to be worried about from what we've seen so far?
Not at all. When you have 3 guys scoring for 20 points plus a game against Florida, as Jefferson, Kennard, and Tatum all did, I think you're very happy as Coach K. A little concerned that Grayson Allen only had 6, I suppose, on 1 of 5 shooting from three-point land, but, I mean, they didn't need it, and in a easy game that they handled the Gators by 10 points at a neutral site. I think Luke Kennard is exceeding everyone's expectations. I knew that Jefferson would bounce back after being hurt last year. I've heard good things about Jason Tatum and Giles and Bolden and all the freshmen. I thought Kennard was just going to be like a nice shooter for this team. He's becoming a star in front of our very eyes, and it's not just scoring. He passes, he rebounds, he does a little of everything. I wouldn't be surprised if he's ACC Player of the Year. He's just putting up amazing stats every night.
Well, Allen more than made up for it with his performance against UNLV on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that was he was a career best performance against UNLV in terms of for Grayson Allen on Saturday as they punished UNLV.
It's just like the Duke UNLV series. You got to love it because the last 2, like every time they've met in the last 25, 26 years, half the time it's been an absolute classic.
Okay, David, thank you for that comment. I do want to bring up a couple of teams in the ACC. I want to start with Virginia Tech, Buzz Williams' squad here, and I know you've got a little bit of history with Buzz Williams, having been the former coach at your school there, Marquette. Only 1 game this week. They took care of Ole Miss by 5 points at home, but only 1 loss of the season so far.
Yeah, I mean, they have the very nice win at Michigan that I think should look pretty good on their resume. Otherwise, I thought, and we mentioned the ACC preview podcast, they're not playing a strong enough schedule for their quality of team. So they'll be a little more reliant on having a couple of big wins in the ACC. But I think they have a decent chance of doing that and getting to the 10 or 8 or so to at least get in the tournament.
Okay, and John T., one other team final team I want to bring up here in the ACC is a team that we all liked heading into the season. At least I thought would be a chance to return, well, not to return to the Final Four, but to compete after their Final Four run last year, and continue to be very disappointed by Syracuse.
Boston College. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, not Boston College, Syracuse. Lost on December 5th to UConn. Did pull off a win over the weekend against Boston U.
Very disappointing. I think the UConn loss should count double just because it's UConn in 2016, frankly. They've had a very tough schedule. When you have losses to an undefeated South Carolina team and at a good Wisconsin team, I don't think that's anything to hang your head about. When your best win is Monmouth, that's certainly cause for concern. They better take care of Georgetown on Saturday in Syracuse. Otherwise, you might have to start worrying about finding the panic button. But the rest of the non-conference schedule looks manageable. They open up at Boston College before a tough 2-game home stretch hosting Miami and Pitt. So I think Syracuse will be okay for now. I think they're going to have a lot of problems in ACC play just because, as we described, there's so many good teams up and down this league.
It's also going to be an emotional game for Syracuse because I believe that's the same day they're going to be honoring the late Pearl Washington.
Yeah.
David, my problem with Syracuse is where are they going to get the road wins now? Because the chance for a big one, they're going to have to knock off a North Carolina on the road or a Louisville on the road, really.
Yeah, well, I think that's swinging over their heads, but I don't know. They go to Clemson, to Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech. They should get at least 2 out of those 3. I think they need to get at least 2. Speaking of that, like you said that this was the last team. What about Clemson and Miami? Is Clemson going to do it? Are they going to get there, or are they just coming up short?
Well, let me pull up Clemson's resume right here in front of me. They are 6-2. They do have the loss to Oklahoma, which is a little disappointing on a neutral court. I'm still not convinced on this Oklahoma team this year. The other losses, Xavier, very respectable. A nice win over a Davidson team that I think will get there in the Atlantic 10. They're not there
Really?
yet.
So you think they're going to get some credit for that?
I think they will get credit for that, but you're right.
They're holding serve. That's all I can say
they're
about
holding
it.
serve. They got a game against Alabama coming up. It's going to be played in Birmingham this weekend. They've got a game at South Carolina coming up as well. So they've got a couple chances here to complete the non-conference schedule. And a game against UNC Wilmington that is not going to look like much if they win it, but it would be I think they'll get credit for it in the selection committee room. It's a very good Wilmington team out of the club.
Right. Because this was sort of would you call them a collective dark horse of ours? We thought that this was a team that could get inside the bubble. 6-2, but again, there's no meat on there yet. And are they good enough to get – they'll have the opportunities when they get in the conference play. Does this team do it? I don't know.
Right. I think they've got those chances left in non-conference play, unlike the other team you brought up, which was Miami. I don't think they have the chances left with Florida Atlantic, GW, and Columbia as their remaining non-conference schedule.
I also give them a little bit of credit for beating Georgia, but then again, if you saw my bracket projection this week, I have them as one of the last teams in right now for that reason.
Clemson? Okay, so you have them right on the bubble. Yeah.
Let's move over to the Big East, and of the remaining undefeated teams we have, I believe we're down to 7 of them at the moment heading into tonight's South Carolina Seton Hall game. John T., both Creighton and Villanova sitting here at 10-0.
Deservedly so. Villanova is meeting everyone's expectations. I actually thought they'd drop off a little bit after losing Ochefu and not having a bunch of big men, but they've been great. Creighton 10-0 under Coach McDermott. The schedule has not been overly challenging. Beating Wisconsin by double digits is fantastic, and they're going to hang their hat on that one in March. They scored 112 against NC State at a neutral site, which is impressive, just purely from an offensive standpoint. ASU in next week is going to be an easy win, I think, as we've seen the Sun Devils struggled all year. I think Creighton could be undefeated when they host Villanova on New Year's Eve. They certainly shouldn't overlook Seton Hall, but that would be a heck of a New Year's Eve matchup. I might have to actually have the college football playoff and basketball on 2 TVs that night.
Wow, college football. David, what's college football?
It kind of goes on until December.
But Matt, let me bring you back in here on another team that's sitting here at 9-1, right behind Creighton and Villanova in the Big East. Butler, who had a very nice win over this past week over Cincinnati.
I think of Butler kind of this year as like sort of a poor man's Wisconsin. That do most things pretty well. They don't have quite the firepower of Wisconsin, which unfortunately got to see firsthand on Saturday. But like execute well, can hit shots. I think right kind of in the 20 to 25 range overall is kind of my gauge on them. Where I think third best team in the Big East, but I think they are a step down from Nova and Creighton.
All right. Well, if we take Nova, Creighton, and then Butler, although the one big bad mark on the blemish on Butler also came this past week. John S. Lost by 1 point at Indiana State. How bad are you going to punish Butler for that loss?
I'm not going to punish Butler too much for one bad loss, even though it was on the road and Indiana State had played a bunch of close games. I think Butler's done more than enough to offset that for the time being, especially when you consider they won against Arizona on a neutral floor. And apparently they were much too physical against Cincinnati for Mick Cronin's liking, which we'll get to a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, and according to Lee Del Vecchio's buddy John Rothstein, it wasn't an upset.
Yes, it was not an upset because Indiana State had lost lots of close games, including a close loss to such powerhouses as Quinnipiac. So that makes the team.
Quinnipiac. So I don't think, to build on what John said, but you have to look at, was it a damaging loss? Yes. Was it damaging to the point to where it negated wins over Arizona, at Utah, the home win against Cincinnati, a nice win over what's looking like it's going to be a nice win against Northwestern? Knock on wood. No, there's still way more good on this profile than bad.
Well, Sleek, let me go back to you for a second, because if we're talking Creighton, Villanova, Butler, the one team we have not yet mentioned is your Xavier Musketeers, coming off a week where they went out to Colorado and lost, came back and won at home against Utah. Are we starting to be worried about the Xavier team after that tough road trip to both Baylor and Colorado?
Well, one thing they had in common with the loss at Baylor and the loss at Colorado is they had scoring droughts in both games, even though they did pretty well as far as rebounding, although turnovers were more of a problem against Baylor, but their shooting was more back in stride in their home win against Utah. I wouldn't worry too much about Xavier yet, but they seem to be on a trajectory where they're going to be more first ballot than they are protected seed if they can't rack up true road wins, going outside of the 3 neutral court wins they got in the Tire Pros Invitational in Orlando.
Yeah, and Chad, well, everybody, we all do the mock committee every year, and when you look at the protected seeds, like the 4 or better, you expect them to win at Colorado. Like, Colorado's most likely a tournament team. I know, Chad, you're not sold on them just yet, but
he's not the only one.
Right. I was expecting Xavier to win that game at Colorado. It's just the kind of game that if you're a protected seed, I think you should be able to win.
Well, if you look at strength of schedules right now, Xavier number 5 in the nation, you can't fault them for an 8-2 record against the number 5 strength of schedule so far. But Matt,
Jesus, what is it without Mizzou?
Matt, your Marquette team played about 30 minutes of pretty good basketball against Wisconsin this weekend.
Yeah, unfortunately, the other 10, the upperclassmen seniors knocked out, I guess, kind of a mixed experience team, but even the seniors at Marquette don't play like seniors, so and that's what I think for Marquette to being a team like Wisconsin, everyone has to be on board, and not Juwan Johnson driving into 4 guys with no plan or throwing passes that have no hopes of getting completed. And that Caden Reinhardt actually came to play, hit some threes, and then reverted back in the second half to being what he's been at Marquette so far. It's a team I think Marquette really feels like probably tournament quality, but probably not first ballot, maybe not dated, although maybe dated somewhere. I guess if there's that spot between first ballot dated or dated.
Well, John T., let me bring up one other team here in the Big East. No, it's not DePaul, and it's not St. John's. The Providence Friars, after an 8-2 start in the 50s in both the Ken Palm and the Sagarin, I did not expect anything out of this team this year. And do you think this is a product of the schedule, or do you think they really do have something going on here in Providence?
They do have something going on. I really thought they were going to have a down year, especially after losing Chris Dunn and others to the NBA. Schedule looked solid. A 5-point road loss at The Ohio State University and a double-digit neutral site loss to a good Virginia team. A win over Rhode Island, which was looking good, and unfortunately now it's starting to look a little worse for wear. They have 3 cupcakes to finish off the next couple of weeks before they go to Xavier and to Butler. That is a tough way to start conference play. But Rodney Bullock has been amazing. I believe he's leading the Big East in scoring this year after being a role player last year. So kudos to Coach Cooley for getting it done this year after losing a guy to the lottery like Chris Dunn.
I think we were saying the same thing about Ben Bennell last year because he wasn't expected to be a superstar either, but he definitely played way up like Bullock has done this year for the Friars.
David, I'm not going to touch on Seton Hall, but after they beat South Carolina tonight, should that happen, we're going to give you a quick second to comment on the game because everyone that's watching this will know that result already.
Yeah, I mean, I think it certainly enhances their profile. Right now, they have the neutral floor win against Cal in Hawaii on their no real meat, so I think this would be their best win up till this point. But just because it's not there, I think Seton Hall, again, they really came on late at the end of last year. I could see them picking it up in conference play and getting in there. I still think they're a tournament team.
What's that scrolling on the bottom of your screen, David? The brown fox jumped over the lazy dogs?
Is that still scrolling? Oh, crap.
Right, well, we're going to work on get David. There must be something that's going on in Seton Hall there. But
yeah.
Let's move over to the Big Ten here. Again, no undefeated teams left in the Big Ten, but we do have 4 one-loss teams. Maryland and Indiana. Well, Indiana, not surprising. I guess the other 3, Maryland, Minnesota, and Rutgers, all with 1 loss. Let me start with you. Besides Indiana, are any of those other 3 actually legitimate?
Yeah, no.
Okay.
and what would Maryland's probably been the luckiest team in the country so far this year, winning a ton of close games. And at some point, I think that luck starts to go back to the mean, because if you play enough close games, and that Minnesota's been a nice surprise, and that like I said in the last podcast, they might be NIT worthy. But given what we thought they were coming in this year, we thought they would be buying NIT for about the next 5 years, plus the real tournament.
I don't know who told them to schedule Vanderbilt, but they picked the right year to beat them on a neutral floor, which is, I think, at the Sanford Pentagon. And they also have some nice wins against Arkansas and UT Arlington, because this was the surprise team I had for my bracket this week. I actually put the Gophers on the 7 line.
Well, how about Rutgers 2-0 on the road, or 2-1 on the road?
Yeah, well, hey,
Wow.
very nice. Very nice win over Stony Brook and a nice close win over Hartford, something Boston College couldn't do.
Yeah, you have 6 wins in home by games. Rutgers does, so I'm not sold on them.
That's a lot better than they've done in recent memory. So
Very true.
John T., let me go to another team a little bit lower down here in the current overall standings at least, but the Northwestern Wildcats, and the big question we ask every year, is this the year? Let me throw it over to you. Is this the year?
It's not, but they still could win 20 games just because when your losses are 2 points at Butler and 4 points neutral site Notre Dame, you're legit. Beating Wake at home, solid. Beating Texas neutral by 19 points, impressive. They have an easy game against Chicago State on Wednesday, and then the tough game coming up on Saturday against Dayton at the United Center. If they beat Dayton, I'm a believer. If they don't beat Dayton, I think that'll be the true test. I think that'll be the true test.
This is the year.
David,
This
one other big game. We already mentioned Wisconsin's win. Michigan went out, played a game at UCLA this weekend. One of the key games we were highlighting this week. Did not get to come up with the win. Is there any cause for concern with Michigan, or is it just that they've hit a bit of a tough section of the schedule now?
I think it's more the latter. I mean, if we look at how good UCLA is, and I've been so big on this UCLA team all year long.
They gave up 102 points to UCLA.
Right. So they did. And it was a hell of a second half, I'll tell you that. But I don't know. I still think Michigan is – I think it's just getting them a minute to get their motors started, although last year it never really did. They just snuck into the tournament. They were in the first 4. Could they be heading in that direction again? Maybe. But if I'm laying odds, I still think that they're good enough to where they'll solidly be in.
Virginia Tech is going to give Michigan the most heartburn at this point because that was a game they led by double figures in the second half, but
Yeah.
the Hokies ultimately came back in that one.
Yeah, and there is, I mean, they have the nice win over Marquette and SMU. That's really the only strength that's on there now, but they have held serve. I'm not concerned that they lost at UCLA.
Matt, Tom Izzo's Michigan State Spartans here, sitting here with a Ken Palm rating of 77, 7-4 overall. Very low compared to what we normally see out of Michigan State by this point in the season, although they are still getting some top 25 votes for both polls. 4 losses, Arizona, Kentucky, Baylor, Duke. You can't fault them too much for that. Does this team get back in there, become a very solid team that contends for the Big Ten title?
I'm not Phil. I think they're miles away from the top 3 of Indiana, Wisconsin, Purdue. They might be in that next tier. Is it? But man, I actually think at this point, I think their in-state rival Michigan's better. I like Northwestern better. And man, after that, maybe they're the 6th to 7th best team, and that probably still might be enough for them to get bid. But I don't know. This is the most danger Izzo team's bad at this point. They're just squeaking out wins against these bad teams, and that's not a good sign.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, okay, a 1-point win at home against Gulf Coast. A 4-point win against Oral Roberts, who is winless against Div 1, by the way. And then not burying Tennessee Tech, who is 2-7. I mean, you just said it, Matt. It's the games that they're sweating out in the way that they are. It's just, what is wrong with Michigan State all of a sudden?
David, I think I saw someone coming into your screen again. I think it's time for an interview with Seton Hall.
Out of here.
All right. John T., one other team here, we haven't really discussed this Purdue team. Very good resume. Obviously, only the losses to Villanova and Louisville so far. A win over Auburn, which is not looking that good after tonight's loss to Boston College. But huge game coming up this weekend with Notre Dame.
Ginormous at the big Crossroads Classic from Indianapolis. The Indiana-Butler game might actually be the better game, but Notre Dame-Purdue is going to be amazing, I think. When you're losing by single digits to teams in the top 10 or top 5 like Villanova and Louisville, I think those are great losses. They haven't played a bunch of top 100 teams besides that. They dump-trucked Arizona State, which brought some joy to my heart. They closed conference play with a couple of cupcakes before going home to host Iowa and Minnesota back-to-back. Assuming they can win those games and can get off to good footing in conference play, I think this is a 20-win team, and I think this is a tournament team.
There was also a tweet from, I think it was Zach Osterman from the Indianapolis Star. This is the first time all 4 teams in the Crossroads Classic are going to be ranked at the same time. To include Purdue and Notre Dame in the other half of that doubleheader.
Yeah, and that's a fun weekend in Indianapolis.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. There's a lot of good games coming up this Saturday, actually. But, David, let's move over to the Big 12, and let me start with Iowa State, actually. And as we cross the Big 10 to the Big 12, we've got to bring this up. What the hell happened against Iowa?
They just got boat raced. I mean, I know it's an emotional rivalry. I know they were on the road, but to never even be within arm's length of the game, it was just a pitiful showing.
And there's nothing there in this Iowa team that makes you think that they've got anything, is there?
Nothing.
Okay. Beyond them, John T., Kansas without Carlton Bragg. We discussed this a little bit at the top of the show. You still comfortable with them as being one of the top teams in the country?
Of course. Your only loss is a 4-point neutral site overtime loss to the Hoosiers. They should be able to take care of non-conference play with Davidson and UNLV upcoming next week. Solid. I don't know if they're like one of the top teams in the country without Bragg, but 9-1 is 9-1.
Yeah, and I still think we've got to circle that non-conference game at the end of January at Kentucky. Going to be a huge game when we get there for them.
It's not the ideal game.
It's not against Missouri, but it's actually going to be a lot better game than had they played Missouri.
No, it won't. It's not the border war.
Matt, the Baylor Bears, one of the few undefeated teams left in the country, number 4 in the AP poll, 5 in the coaches
need it back
this week.
Chad, we need the border war.
Someone mute David.
I think we need to get Jolu Laquille to swat the puppet out of the screen right now.
Why?
But Matt, your thoughts on this Baylor team here?
Matt, I really like this group. That front line with Laquille and Motley, might be the best front line in college basketball. Good enough game. Mario LeCompte, really nice at the point guard. And then, I think just enough. He's about 4 or 5 options. It's a 2. It's a starter, Edmond, Clore, Wish, and that what you have enough to where you can kind of play to see which one of those guys is hot that game to maybe hit a couple shots if you need it. And just quietly, Scott, you assembled a really nice roster that wasn't great on paper per se for recruiting rankings and that, but just blends together.
I gotta say that I don't know what's coming up this next couple of weeks. I think Baylor got their conferences confused. Their next 4 games include games against Southern, Jackson State, and Texas Southern. So they seem to think they're members of the SWAC this week.
Every year, they try and win the SWAC title before conference play. But I can't knock them too much because in the early part of the season, they did play a much tougher schedule than what we normally see out of them.
John T., right now, Sagarin ratings have the number 1 team in the nation as being the West Virginia Mountaineers. I'm not that certain how he came to that, but is that how good West Virginia really is? Are they among the top 10 of the country even?
I think they are. 8-1, only lost by 4 points at neutral site to Temple. Going to Virginia and beating them.
That was great.
It's arguably one of the wins of the year, I think, in the nation. The rest of the schedule, average. 3 cupcakes coming up before they travel to Oklahoma State and Texas Tech to start conference play. Huggins is throwing everything on the court, and it's working with the press and the athleticism. 800 wins for Coach Huggins. I was reading some article about whether he belongs in the Hall of Fame, and they were saying if Eddie Sutton isn't, then Huggins isn't. He really – it's a question for a separate show, but, like, if you look at Bob Huggins' resume, I think it is Hall of Fame caliber.
I would agree. And one of the things on there, and again, for a separate show, that's why I bring it up, is program builders. Cincinnati was not in very good shape when he took it over, and West Virginia wasn't anywhere near the caliber that they are now. He took both of them to Final Fours. He had both of them in the rankings. If you were to look at the amount of time his teams have been in the rankings, I think it would be comparative to any Hall of Fame coach, wouldn't you?
And he also took Akron to both the NCAA and the NIT in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe he did, yeah. So, I mean, he's been successful, and he's done it at places that weren't all that good when he got there.
Well, could talk about a couple other teams here. And Dave, let me stick with you for a second. TCU did suffer their first loss of the season at SMU this past week by, I think, about 50 points or something like that. Are you still on this TCU bandwagon, or are they starting to show the cracks here?
Well, they're showing the cracks. I'm on the bandwagon as far as them being a lot better than I thought they were. I don't think they're all the way to an NCAA tournament caliber team, but they're noticeably better. And I think that when they get into conference play, I think they're going to snake bite someone on their home court, maybe a couple teams, and they'll hold serve against, I think, the middle and the bottom of the league. And I could see them winning 6 or 7 league games.
I was just going to ask David how many NCAA bids you would have given TCU this week if you were doing the bracket.
Chad, shut John up, please.
Yeah, John, you're on mute for the rest of the show. John T., another team I wanted to mention here, and I hate mentioning them. They actually got a vote in the AP poll this week even. Bruce Weber's Kansas State Wildcats are sitting here at 9-1, 34 in the Ken Pom ratings, in the top 50 in Sagarin as well. Only the one loss. Is this team we need to start discussing, or can we please not?
I will vote for please not. Granted, they're literally 1 point. 1 point loss to Maryland at neutral site back Thanksgiving weekend, 1 point away from being undefeated. So that deserves some credit. But when your best win is at home over Nebraska, Omaha, in mid-November, I think you're a fraud.
Okay.
I just want to say, you know how I value road wins? Not when you win at St. Louis. That no value or merit to that at all.
And I will give them credit for this as well. Strength of schedule right now is 305 in the nation. That's pathetic.
That is almost hard to do. You have to work to get it that week. Let me see. Just on Warren's page here, 1, 2, 3. I mean, yeah, there's quite a few sub-300 teams.
Let's move on. Matt, let me turn to you as we move over to the Pac-12 conference. Probably the most notable win out of the Pac-12 this week was obviously UCLA's win over Michigan here, but UCLA now number 2 in both polls. I would argue they should be number 1 even over Villanova. Would you agree with me?
I would disagree on that. If we're going strictly by resume, I'd actually have Baylor number 1. If we're going by on the court, I might have Duke number 1. I feel like Nova's kind of an in-between of done some nice things, look pretty good at the computer ratings and that, but like the one thing UCLA, and I'll give it to our erstwhile colleague Kyle, pointed out, even with all that, there's still only 70-30 defensive efficiency, and that as fun as they are to watch, and I love that style of play of that. I think come tournament time, someone's gonna be able. It probably won't be in the first weekend, but come Sweet 16, Elite 8, someone will have the capability to score with them, and then get enough stops. At some point, I think they're Sweet 16, Elite 8 good. I don't think they're Final Four good.
Well, John T., this UCLA team, Lonzo Ball, I've heard him mentioned as a potential number 1 NBA draft pick at this point from the way he's played. Are you there with him?
He's amazing. He deserves to be a lottery pick whenever he comes out. Maybe the first overall pick. If you think he is the second coming of Jason Kidd, then he should be. As far as what I've seen from mock drafts, I think that a lot of people have a top three of maybe him, but a lot of Josh Jackson of Kansas because of his athleticism, Markel Fultz of Washington because he's doing everything this year for a terrible Washington team, and then maybe some big man like Jonathan Isaac. But Lonzo Ball seems to be the real deal, keeping in mind he might not even be the best player in his own family, which is even more amazing.
David, USC is also undefeated, almost quietly undefeated here in the Pac-12.
Yeah, finally cracking the polls this week, and I don't know why it's taking so many people so long to recognize them. And it isn't like they've just won home bye games. You know, they had the win against Texas A&M on the road. They have the neutral floor win against BYU. And, yeah, they've won a lot of home bye games, but, you know, they've also – they beat SMU, who's pretty good. There's enough on there to warrant a top 25 ranking, and I think they're deserving of it. I think they're a solid tournament team, and furthermore, as they were last year, coming into the year, we were questioning whether Andy Enfield would still be there at the end of the year. Here they are again. I don't think any of us expected them to be this good, yet here they are again looking like a tournament team.
I would question SMU being good, but I would not question USC being one of the, I guess you could say, the top 20 or even top 16 teams if we like to talk protected seeds at this stage.
Yeah, and as far as wins away from home, they're beginning a stretch, and I guess if you count the Hall LA games as neutral floor games, it's a stretch of 8 straight games away from home that they're in the midst of now. If they win all these, it would include finishing at Oregon, then you might have to start considering that they're good.
Well, Matt, David just mentioned Oregon. Let's turn to them next. Almost we're ready to write them off with that loss out of Maui to Georgetown to start that tournament. They've won 6 in a row since then and really seem to be getting things together. Would you agree?
Yeah, they're starting to hit a little bit of a side. I know they had the close win over Alabama this weekend, an Alabama team that I don't think a whole lot of, that I would have thought on their home court that's a game. I think had they been a top 10 team like we thought, that's a game they win by 12, 15 points and not have to go down to the wire to win. I think they end up winning by 9 after free throws on that. But they're coming along a bit, but I think maybe readjust expectations in that not the top 10 team that, like, I had them as a 1 seed in the West coming into the year, and now I'm thinking more 5, 6 seed.
Chet, I have something here that maybe Stalika, our historian, could look up. You see right here, this is USC's schedule. We have the Continental Tire Las Vegas Classic - Los Angeles, California. What the hell is that?
Okay. Yeah, that actually is some of their home court games, and that is part of that event. But sure.
It is actually a bracketed event, David. They're just showing the first of the 2 games at this point.
Yeah,
the Las Vegas Invitational.
Because the Las Vegas Invitational, of course, it's in Los Angeles.
And the Las Vegas Classic is actually right before Christmas.
Yeah, in LA. So
well,
I mean,
let me go over to John T.
Florida.
Yeah, David, let me go over to John T., the one other team we want to discuss in the Pac-12, Arizona. John, I was kind of wondering what was going on for about 25, 30 minutes of the Missouri game. Were you also?
Well, they started off great. I think they were up 22-7 to start, and then they let the Tigers back in the game, and it was, I believe, a 4-point game early in the second half. And then they just stepped on their throat with a 21-0 run. Everybody's making threes. They had 4 guys in the game have multiple 3-point shots, which I assure you, and I've watched this team a long time. You don't see that too much. Usually it's just a couple of great guards. Markkanen's making threes. The young guys, Simmons and Alkins, freshmen, combined 7 of 13 from behind the arc and really led this team, and literally led this team with 19 points each. A great road win over a bad team, but I'll take it. And we're still running out of players. Trier, who knows when he's going to come back. Parker Jackson Cartwright, probably not back for another month and change. Like, we need bodies, but bodies we have are pretty good.
Yeah, Dave, one other team real quickly here in the Pac-12. Colorado got that huge win at home over Xavier. Also has been Texas, but losses to Colorado State, BYU, and Notre Dame. Are you on this Colorado bandwagon?
I think that they're a little bit schizophrenic. I think their ceiling is really high. We saw that against Xavier. And even in a loss, albeit I thought they played really well in that game against Notre Dame back around Thanksgiving. So I think that their ceiling's there. I really, really, really like their chances this Saturday at home against Fort Hays State. I think that they should be able to pick that one up. But yeah, I still think at the end of the day that they'll find a way to get inside the bubble, maybe 9-10 seed range.
And judging by the result on Sunday, I think one team I can safely say we're not going to be discussing in March is going to be Oregon State.
Brother.
Yeah, Oregon State, a very, very impressive home loss to Savannah State. Wow.
That is not a good day. That's a sign things are not going well, losing to a sub-300 Savannah State team.
I say, what did the loss before that say?
Okay, let's move over to the SEC here. Obviously, Kentucky sitting here 9-1 with only the loss to UCLA. As we record this, South Carolina is up in the first half against Seton Hall, try to remain undefeated. But, Matt, let me bring you here to a couple other teams. Let's start with the Florida Gators, who had a real rough week with losses both to Florida and to both to Duke and to Florida State this week.
Yeah, I'd say it's a tough week in them that, like, the thoughts of that maybe being a protected seed now are probably gone. But, like, I was kind of impressed because I actually did watch both of those games. And, that, like, realistically, how many teams are going to beat Duke on a neutral floor or beat Florida State on their home court? I mean, that's only the 5 or 10 best teams in America might be expected to come out with a win there.
And don't forget their game against Gonzaga during Thanksgiving weekend either. So they've played one of the more difficult schedules so far.
Yeah, they've actually still yet to play a true home game because the O-Dome is being renovated and will be open pretty soon. So all things considered, I think, yeah, played a nice schedule. Got the win over Miami, which, if nothing else, if they're compared in the tournament discussion toward the latter half for the at-large discussion, that's a win that'll look pretty good. And I think, actually, I think still solidly the second best team I know. South Carolina is still undefeated in that, but yeah, give me Florida and their schedule over South Carolina that has a couple of decent wins over Cuse and Michigan, but still not sold on that being as good as Florida.
What they did do very well, at least Coach Mike White, was he gave a fantastic halftime interview at the Duke at their game against Duke. He basically said, "Well, Duke's good. We're not as good. We need to get better."
John T. Want to turn to a couple of teams here. First of all, Arkansas is out at 81, top 50 Ken Palm team right now. Not much in terms of the resume, though. Is this still one of these teams that it's just too early to tell on? And even though we're getting towards the middle of December here?
It is. The Texas-Arlington win looks nice. The Houston win looks blah. The game against Texas this coming weekend in Houston as part of the fantastic tournament known as the Lone Star Shootout featuring Arizona and Texas A&M in the better game is going to be a nice test for them. But I think too early to tell. And then they have a couple of cupcakes before they host Florida on December 29th. That will be the first real test.
All right. And David, we just saw tonight Auburn lose. Interestingly, the first game they ever played in New York City. I was kind of surprised by that. The school never played a game in New York, and I don't think they ever want to go back after what happened tonight.
That's almost unbelievable. They've never played in New York City.
They never played a game in New York City before, not only Madison Square Garden, but any arena in New York City. First time ever tonight, and they go there and they lose to Boston College.
Well, you know what this means, John. It means they're coming off the survival.
Oh, they're still alive for the automatic bid. So they can
okay, yeah.
Let's keep rolling here through a couple other conferences. Let's turn John Stalika. Let me go over to the American Conference. You want to make some comments about Mick Cronin. Obviously, Cincinnati. Tough loss to Butler. Way too physical of a game, correct?
Yep. And the sad thing is Cincinnati is probably the flagship program of the American this year when you look at how inconsistent Temple has been. Central Florida, they lost a game to Penn tonight, and UConn has been walking wounded this year. But it's funny that Mick Cronin, who has built his program on toughness. He's complaining that Butler was too tough for him, and also complaining about Big East officials not following the mandates of the rest of the NCAA. And I think the Puppet also noted this in another email thread. Mick Cronin just basically gave the blueprint on how to beat his team during the season.
Yes, few things are more amusing than Mick Cronin being angry. It is wonderful. He blows a gasket. I mean, he just goes into Yosemite Sam mode at least once every big game and gets teed up. And after getting the tee, he rarely calms down. If anything, he gets more angry. And then at the end of the game, whenever they lose, he makes a beautiful comment or a beautiful excuse as to why it happened. And this was no exception. It was too physical. I used to coach in that league, and that's just how it is. I mean, Mick Cronin, when you look at his body of work, he is a fantastic coach, did very well at Murray State, took over a Cincinnati team after it had been crashed into the mountain and built them up to what they are. But is he one of the better characters in college basketball? Because it's almost like he's some guy on a TV show.
David, I'll tell you that one of my favorite comments from him last year after a win at South Florida, where he discussed how tough it is to play in South Florida and what a big home court advantage they have there. It's a team that has not won more than 8 games in the last 3 years, and needed a 13-0 run to end regulation to beat Bethune-Cookman at home tonight. So obviously that huge South Florida home court advantage.
I mean, he's like a baseball manager. I mean, he just blows his stack, and it is amazing. I love it.
And that's probably a sign that he's back to better health, because let's not forget, a couple of years ago he actually had a health scare and had to tone it down a bit. But
yeah, and it was a legitimate scare. Like, I mean, it was nothing to make light of. But
let's turn over to the Atlantic 10 and John T. Dayton off to probably the best start of anybody in this conference. Have now piled 5 straight wins, including a nice win over an East Tennessee State team that's pretty good by Southern Conference standards, at least.
Yeah, and you got to commend Archie Miller. I mean, going into having St. Joseph's, Indiana, come in and take care of business against them. That's a great cupcake win there. It'll be a nice game against Northwestern coming up at the United Center. Vandy seems like they're having a very off year, so I think that Dayton can beat them in Dayton. And then they get into conference play, and frankly, the A-10 looks a little weak this year. So, again, like I've said with many other teams, I like Dayton to win 20 games and make the tournament.
Matt, VCU struggling, Rhode Island now struggling. Is there anybody else even really worth looking at here in the Atlantic 10?
Probably not. And that, like, say, Davidson, when they're in that tournament, they need a win over a team like Clemson if you're hoping to be an at-large quality team. And that the Bonnies, I think, have a nice record, but against 2. And then again, they lost a close game against Florida. That would have been, I think, a big win for them. So now the A-10 is perilously looking like a 1-2-man league. Now, I thought that for about the last 3 or 4 years, and come March, they have 4 teams in. But like, this really feels like the year of Dayton will probably end up in the tournament. But after that, should Dayton get the auto bid, it might be Uno bid for the A-10.
I think we had the same blueprint for VCU last year, but they really picked the wrong year to lose to Georgia Tech at home, mind you.
Yeah, and nobody's winning any games. I mean, nobody's doing anything noteworthy, so it's kind of hard for the league to build its credentials. And don't be surprised. In fact, I'll be surprised if VCU beats Middle Tennessee this weekend.
Well, David, during both, I think, last week's Hoops HD report as well as our Under the Radar, both times I said take a look out for this Arlington-St. Mary's game that was coming up last week, Thursday evening.
Yeah.
Not only did Arlington go in there and beat St. Mary's, they pretty much dominated the game.
Right. And I predicted this. I mean, I saw this coming. I was talking about it for at least a week about how Arlington was going to win this game.
Are you concerned for St. Mary's now after the way they just didn't even bother showing up for this game?
Long term, no. I mean, I think it was more or less just a bump in the road. They came back and clobbered Irvine, as you would expect. They're probably going to blow through their next probably all the way through until they go to Gonzaga. I
Roger that.
expected them went out through that whole stretch.
What
I'll
I
say that-
said for Butler earlier, I'll say the same thing for St. Mary's. They've passed enough tests away from home in places like Dayton and Stanford. I can give them a pass for one toe stub at home like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And John T., the other team here in the West Coast Conference, the other key team, Gonzaga, 10-0 for the first time in school history. I didn't realize that, but first time they've ever reached the 10-0 mark. When is this team going to lose?
Perhaps on Sunday when they go to Nashville to play Tennessee, but especially after seeing Tennessee play in Chapel Hill the other day. If not, they're not going to be losing for a long time. They host St. Mary's on January 14th. They go to St. Mary's in February 11th. But this team is legit. When you're beating Florida and Iowa State and Arizona at neutral sites, this team is for real. Again, I still don't know if they're going to be like a top 3 seed, but it certainly seems like they're heading that direction.
Matt, the BYU Cougars, we were ready to rate them off, and then they come up with a nice win over Colorado. Is it enough to save a little bit of life here in an outside shot in that large bid still?
It might be in that. I was going to point out, when do they play BYU? Because I know in past years, BYU has done fairly well. They ended Gonzaga's undefeated streak a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
At BYU Gonzaga's at BYU February 2nd, and the home game is actually the last game of the season on February 25th. So it's not going to be till February again there.
Okay, yeah, so that'd be like a spot where, BYU, they probably need at least 2 out of 4 in the St. Mary's and Gonzaga games, and not too many losses otherwise for them to be in. And I still, at this point, probably tracking a little more NIT, but I will say I think their backcourt of TJ Haws and then Nick Embry. Yeah, I know his brother Jackson too used to play there, but yeah, I think the little brothers, I think are more capable. That I know TJ Haws his first year off the mission, probably taking a little time to get settled in, but like if he steps up and then like Nick Embry starts playing even the level he did last year, and as he did especially in WCC play, they could be in the discussion. I think they have some untapped potential they've yet to meet this year so far.
One other team I want to discuss real quick here, John Stalik, let me bring them up to Mountain West. I think there's only one team worth mentioning. Nevada did pick up a nice road win at Washington over the weekend. How good do you think this team would have to run through do you think this team would have to run through the conference here to get an at-large bid should they fall in the conference tournament?
I would say at the minimum, they should probably win the conference outright and at least get to the conference title game. But
well, I'm not saying just outright, because I think if they go 13-5 and win it outright, I don't think that's going to be enough.
That's why I'm saying let me finish here, because that wasn't enough for a team like San Diego State last year. I mean, I know Nevada split against Iona, but one of those was on a neutral court in Alaska, and the other one was, I think, a non-bracketed game in Reno against the Gales as well. But there just aren't going to be that many opportunities. Colorado State, maybe, but that's nothing about the Rams that screams at large to me right now.
Yeah, I like Colorado State's win at Colorado, and I think they've looked better than Nevada, at least when I've seen them. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Colorado State finish ahead of them. But there isn't a whole lot of room for error. I mean, there is room for a Mountain West team to land inside the bubble, but they would have to run away from the league a little bit and avoid bad losses, which means avoiding losing to pretty much everyone. And
At this point, I want to go through a couple of things here. I want to run through each of you here. First of all, we have 7 undefeated teams left, including South Carolina, who is up at the half here right now as we record this, but Villanova, UCLA, Baylor, Gonzaga, Creighton, and USC being the 6 others. My question to each of you is going to be, which is going to be the last undefeated team standing? David, let me start with you. Gonzaga. John Slika?
Yeah.
I'm going to go the other way and say UCLA.
All right. Matt?
Actually, I will also say Gonzaga.
And John T.
I want to say Gonzaga. I really think that after watching Tennessee, I'm starting to become a believer. So I think it's going to be the Villanova-Creighton winner. Not that the Big East is easy this year, but I think that whoever wins that game will prove that they are head and shoulders above the rest.
Well, I am really on this UCLA bandwagon, so I'm going with them as well. I think it's a tougher stretch to get there, but I think Gonzaga is going to slip up, and maybe it's going to be in the early January home game against St. Mary's. I think they'll get through this Tennessee game, but I think UCLA is that good this year. And let me throw kind of the reverse question out at you, at each of you here. There are 4 teams left without a win against anybody. Dartmouth, Mississippi Valley State, Coppin State, and Alabama A&M. John T., let me start with you this time. Who's going to be the last team to pick up a win?
I'm going to keep it in the Ivy League and go with Dartmouth. They almost beat Rhode Island by losing by 23 points. So I think that they just lost by 5 points to a terrible Maine team. I understand the SWAC is the SWAC, but I'll go with Dartmouth.
Okay. Stalika.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're being blown out by Missouri, that's not good. So my advance apologies to Alabama A&M.
Matt.
I will go Dartmouth just because I think their league is far tougher than the other 3, so therefore I think it's going to be the hardest for them to get a win, where these other teams, they might not be good, but they have a whole lot of conference mates that are also not good, so they just have the right night will stumble into a couple of wins, where Dartmouth, even though the Ivy's a little worse than we thought, it's still – they're miles behind most of the teams in the Ivy.
David.
Alabama A&M will win the Centenary.
I'm with you on Alabama A&M, but it's mostly because of what's coming up here Thursday night. Coppin State, one of these 4 teams, is playing a non-D1 team, Goldie Beacom. They've already lost at home to Chestnut Hill. Should they lose this game, I will be on Coppin State, but I just think they've got such an overwhelming chance to win a non-D1 game. I'd be shocked if they lost it.
Isn't that a character from Back to the Future? Goldie, or no, that's Goldie Wilson.
Goldie Wilson.
Yeah.
Wilson.
I just want to run through quickly through some of the upcoming games this week. We only have a few minutes left, but most of the good games coming up this week are coming up this weekend. We've already addressed some of them, but during the week, most teams are finals. But John T., huge game tomorrow night, Temple at Villanova.
It is. Gotta love Big 5 basketball. We saw the other day LaSalle, Villanova at the Palestra, even though Seth Greenberg kept saying it was at LaSalle. Come on, Seth. That nothing is given in the Big 5. Villanova is the heavy favorite, of course, but I do love my friend Dunphy, so I think Temple will keep it close.
Right. And the other big game coming up during the week for weekday games, maybe I stick with you, Tytel, here. Wednesday night, your Arizona Wildcats hosting the Grand Canyon Antelopes. That's the team of the people. He was looking for. And interestingly, Sean Miller stated today that he would not be adverse in the future at some point to actually playing at Grand Canyon.
I just hope he's not adverse to guarding Dwayne Russell, who's second in the nation in scoring at 25.4 points a game. It's weird. You think of somebody from the Lopes as a big scorer. You assume he's just a gunner. But Russell gets to the free throw line 8 times a game. He's averaging almost 6 assists a game. He's doing a little of everything. I think he's a front runner for his conference's player of the year.
We've got coming up on Saturday, it seems to be doubleheader day, I guess I would call it. We have in Houston the Lone Star Shootout featuring a doubleheader of Texas A&M, Arizona, followed by Arkansas, Kansas. We also have the Orange Bowl Classic featuring Manhattan versus Florida State, followed by Charlotte versus Florida. Not as exciting there.
Right.
But David, the big CBS Sports Classic here. Ohio State versus UCLA is the first game. North Carolina and Kentucky is the second game.
Yeah, and this is generally a pretty big event. As a doubleheader, they typically get good matchups, and this is no exception. That second game is going to be a lot of fun. North Carolina, Kentucky.
Right, and a few other doubleheaders. Also, the Stalika, we have the Crossroads Classic coming up. We mentioned this earlier. Purdue, Notre Dame in the early game. Butler, Indiana in the late game. We also have the Big Four Classic. I guess we actually technically have both Big Four Classics coming up. The Iowa Big Four Classics featuring Iowa, Northern Iowa, and Drake versus Iowa State. And the Western New York Big Four Classic featuring St. Bonaventure versus Niagara and Canisius against Buffalo.
Yeah, I started thinking of the Big Four in the Buffalo area when you first mentioned it, because it seems like it could be another possible coming out party for St. Bonaventure in that one.
And yet, Matt, one more doubleheader coming up on Saturday. The State Farm Chicago Legends, BYU, Illinois. The nightcap, the early game is Dayton and Northwestern.
Man, that feels like a chip to Dayton in that one. Like big games for all the. I like Northwestern this game. I think to finally win a big game. I mean, they narrowly lost to Butler. They narrowly lost to Notre Dame. I think Dayton might just be the hair enough step down to where Northwestern comes in and gets the big win to bolster their tournament resume.
But as Matt noted, Dayton fans will travel, so it's not going to necessarily feel like that much of a home game for Northwestern as it normally would be.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that matchup. I think that's one that both of them kind of need.
Also, another game, not part of any showcase, but just kind of keep an eye on this in the Atlantic 10. Middle Tennessee's at VCU coming up on Saturday. A very good Middle Tennessee team.
Yeah, very good. A better team than VCU.
Also, Kansas versus Davidson is another game coming up, and a huge doubleheader coming up on Sunday. John T. At Madison Square Garden, where David is supposed to be tonight, but he isn't. Penn State versus St. John's, followed by Fordham versus Rutgers. How exciting!
Oh, what a showcase!
I just need to know, Chad, are you picking the Fordham Rutgers upset there or not?
Which team would be the upset?
Exactly.
But also
we
come
also have one other showcase on Saturday night, the sixth fixture of the Skip Prosser Classic between Xavier and Wake Forest.
Yes, thank you, John. The Xavier Wake Forest game coming up on Saturday night, and a couple neutral site games though on Sunday. We mentioned these earlier: the Gonzaga Tennessee game in Nashville and the Clemson Alabama game in Birmingham. So it's going to be a real week in terms of the weekdays this week. Real exciting in terms of this weekend.
Yeah, for sure.
They just got to get through exams this week.
Mm-hmm.
Well, John S., I think we're just about time. I guess you maybe got to go study for your exams there. But let me turn to you first for any final thoughts for the evening.
Yeah, we didn't really tease this earlier, but I think we may have had our biggest RPI mismatch in recent memory last week when number 2 Creighton took on number 351 Longwood at home. Needless to say, that was a 50-plus point blowout for the Blue Jays.
Yeah, that was, I guess you could have 1 versus 351. I don't have any recollection of it ever happening. Matt, let me turn to you next.
I am looking at the Big 12. I think I know number 1 currently, the Ken Pom in that, and I'm actually not buying it. I think they're really good at the top with Kansas, Baylor, and then a West Virginia team I'll admit to underestimating. But after that, it feels like there's a big drop-off in that. Like, Iowa State's kind of proven to be a little bit of a fraud here lately. And that some of the other teams like Texas Tech, Kansas State, TCU, gaudy records, but against 2. And then now Oklahoma and Oklahoma State have both kind of fallen back to earth here a little bit. Oklahoma to be expected probably with nobody healed. And then, but that's a count that, like, it feels like 3 really good teams, and then we're going to be really trying to eke out a 4th and 5th. They'll probably make the tournament just because they're bereft of the teams outside the Big 6 leagues. But, man, like, I don't think the Big 12 is really that good. I think we had it pegged right at the beginning of the year, and I think come tournament time, we'll look smart for saying it's really not that great of a league.
John T.
We've mentioned all the problems in the state of Michigan between the incident at Western Michigan and the struggles with the Spartans and Michigan getting blown out by UCLA in the second half. I want to give a little love to my main man, Marcus Keene at Central Michigan. He transferred in from Youngstown State as talk about under the radar. I don't think anybody had huge plans for this guy. Averaging 30.8 points a game this year, making over 40% of his threes, over 84% of his free throws. The team's 8-3, so I don't think you can bank on them for the NCAA tournament or anything. Last player to score 30 points in the season, it wasn't Jimmer, it wasn't Doug McDermott, it wasn't Steph Curry. Charles Jones of Long Island 20 years ago. I hope Keene can get 30 points a game. I don't know if he's going to play in the NBA or anything, but I like this guy.
Well, you just made me feel old to mention that Charles Jones was 20 years ago. Wow. But, David, let me turn to you.
Yeah, outside of it's just the lack of quality outside of the Power 5 and the Big East. We debated on whether or not to move the West Coast Conference onto the radar. We did, and it was a good thing that we did, because if you look at the Mountain West, the American, and the Atlantic 10, they have the same number of teams combined that look to be inside the bubble that the West Coast currently has.
You're right there. That's impressive. I want to just shoot a little note here about two teams we did not technically discuss tonight. We'll be discussing them in the Under the Radar, but we might be discussing the Hoops HD report next week when they crack the top 25, and that's Wichita State, a very nice win this past week over Oklahoma. Just missed both top 25 polls, 27th overall in both polls. So this is a team that I really am starting to take a serious look at again, and it might be a team that we are going to be discussing a lot more very soon. But again, then on behalf of Matt Sikowski and John Teitel down there, John Salika over there, David Griggs over there, I want to thank everybody for joining us. And now if you just want to hang in here for a couple seconds, David is going to have a live interview on his couch.
Right.
So please just keep watching, everybody.
Okay.
If you don't want to watch, have a great night, and we'll talk to you again.
If it goes dark, don't be alarmed. They're on their way.